There is a smell that only happens in a kitchen on a cold morning, and it is the smell of an orange being peeled slowly, in strips, the way an older person peels one when they are not really in a hurry. The oil from the skin pops into the air. It hits the back of your nose. It rides on top of the steam from the coffee. And for about 5 seconds, the whole room smells like something that is not really part of winter anymore. It smells like a place where citrus grows, somewhere sunny, somewhere we have never been. And every single time I catch that smell now, I think about the rose bush in the back of our yard, and I think about how we got from that smell to where we are. Because what happened in our yard last year was not the kind of thing I planned, and it was not the kind of thing I would have believed if someone had told me about it in advance. We changed a single small habit in the kitchen. We changed what we did with the peels. And by the middle of summer, the oldest rose bush on the property was doing something it had not done in the entire time we have lived here. The flowers came in larger than they had been since long before we moved in. The color deepened, the petals held longer, and the bush did this without a single new bag from the garden center. Just peels, buried quietly under the soil, month after month. Let me take you all the way back to where this started, because it is a smaller, quieter story than you might think, and I think the smallness of it is part of why it matters. This is not a story about a dramatic experiment with measurements and charts. It is a story about what happens when you stop sending a perfectly good resource to the landfill every week of your life. My grandmother had a way of treating the kitchen like a small farm. She did not use that word. She would not have known what to do with it. But the kitchen ran on a loop, the way a creek runs back to the same stream. The garden fed the kitchen. The kitchen fed the garden. Scraps went one direction. Vegetables came back the other direction. Peels, cores, ends, husks, the tough outer leaves, the things you would normally throw away without thinking about it, all of it had somewhere to go. None of it ever touched the garbage. I do not remember her explaining it. I do not remember a single conversation about it. I just remember watching, the way children watch, and what I absorbed was this. Nothing in the kitchen was wasted, because nothing in the garden was wasted either. That memory sat in me for a long time without doing much. I grew up. I moved away. I learned the modern way, which is mostly the buying way. You buy what you need from the store. You throw away what you do not need. You believe the bag when the bag tells you what to do. The cycle never closes. The truck just keeps coming. But I never quite forgot her kitchen. And when my wife and I bought a house with a yard big enough to put in a garden, and then a few rose bushes along the back fence, that old memory started walking back into my hands without me asking it to. The first spring, we did what most new homeowners do. We bought bags of soil amendment. We bought fertilizer. We bought mulch. We did all the things the garden center told us to do. The roses bloomed. They were fine. We were fine with fine. By the second year, the roses were a little less enthusiastic. The flowers came in smaller. The leaves started looking dusty by mid-July. That pale kind of green that does not quite have any life underneath it. By the third year, the bushes were bigger, technically stronger, the canes were thicker, but the bloom itself was smaller than the very first year we had been here. That is the part nobody warns you about when they sell you a rose. A rose bush can slow down while it is still technically alive. It can look like it is doing its job while quietly doing less of it. And because it is still green above the soil, you assume you are doing something wrong somewhere else. You buy another product. You try another amendment. You go back to the garden center and ask more questions. And the underlying problem never quite gets solved, because the underlying problem is not on the shelf. The underlying problem is what is missing in the soil underneath the plant. We did nothing dramatic at the start. We just ran out of one of our amendments in midsummer, and the bowl of orange peels from breakfast was sitting on the counter that morning, the way it sits every morning after the kids eat. So I went outside with the kitchen knife still on my hip, dug a shallow ring trench around the base of the bush, dropped the peels into the trench, covered them with soil, watered it in, and walked back into the house thinking absolutely nothing of it. I had not even told my wife I had done it. There was nothing to tell. That was month 1. A month later, I had done the same thing 3 more times. Grapefruit peels 1 week, lemon peels the next, orange peels the week after that. The job took longer to walk to the bush than it took to actually bury them. I had stopped thinking about it as gardening, and started thinking about it as housekeeping. The peels left the kitchen. They entered the soil. The soil did whatever it did in the dark. The bush did whatever it did in the light. By month 3, the leaves of the bush looked darker. Not greener in the obvious spring way, darker in a way that meant the plant was actually feeding well underneath. You can usually tell when a plant is just surviving versus when it is feeding on something real, and the difference shows up in the leaf color before it shows up anywhere else. The leaves went from the dusty kind of green that reads as tired to the kind of green that reads as paid for. The kind you see on a bush that is being met, the way a paycheck meets a need that has been waiting. By month 4, the bush bloomed hard. The flowers were bigger, and I am not talking about a little. I am talking about the kind of bigger you notice from 20 feet away, without trying. The petals held longer. The color went from the usual pale pink into something deeper. Almost the color of an old barn that has just been rained on. Almost the color of a velvet curtain pulled halfway across a window. And the smell. I cannot fully describe the smell other than to say it was the kind of smell that made my wife stop what she was doing inside the house and walk outside to ask what had changed. That is when you know the change is real, not when you notice it, when somebody else in your house notices it first. A neighbor walked over from across the fence the next weekend and asked what we had done differently. I had to stop and actually think about the answer, because what we had done differently was nothing more than what my grandmother had done in her kitchen, without ever explaining it to anyone. We had closed the loop on a small piece of the food we ate. We had let the peels go back into the soil instead of into the trash bag. Then I started paying attention. Not dramatically, not with a research project, just with the kind of curiosity you have when something in your own yard tells you there is more to learn. I called a retired nurseryman 3 counties over who had agreed to talk to me once before about a different question. I asked him about peels under roses. He laughed in a quiet, knowing way. The kind of laugh a person laughs when they have been waiting 30 years for someone to ask the right question. He said his father did it. His grandfather did it. He stopped doing it at some point because the garden centers told him the modern amendments were enough. He went back to doing it 2 years ago. His roses, he said, do not look like roses that get only what the bag gives them. They look like roses that get what the soil gives them. Because that is what is happening now. So the question I want to spend the rest of this answering for you is the why. Because the why is the part that changes how you see the peel in your hand tomorrow morning, and it is the part that makes the difference between doing this once because it sounds interesting, and doing it forever because it actually makes sense. The first layer of the why is the simplest one. Orange peels break down slowly. Much more slowly than most kitchen scraps. That is not a flaw. It is the actual feature. A banana peel gives a quick pop of potassium and vanishes into the soil in 2 or 3 weeks. A coffee filter gives nitrogen and phosphorus pretty fast. A peel sits in the soil and keeps feeding it for months. Roses do not grow on a sprint. They grow on an arc. Spring green. Early summer wood. Midsummer bud set. Late summer bloom. Early autumn rest. A fast release does not match that rhythm. A slow release matches it almost perfectly. The peel behaves less like a spark and more like a long burning coal. And a rose bush was built for a long burning coal. The second layer is what is actually inside the peel. Orange peels carry calcium, potassium, magnesium, and a little phosphorus in modest but meaningful amounts. Roses are heavy users of all of these. Potassium drives bloom. Calcium builds the cell structure that holds a heavy flower up on a long stem. Magnesium helps the plant pull deep green color into the leaves. Phosphorus supports root development and bud set. A single peel will not move the needle on any of those numbers in any test your neighbor could run with a kit from the hardware store. But a steady stream of peels added over an entire season does something no single bag of fertilizer can do in the same way. Because the peels are not feeding the plant directly. They are feeding the soil underneath the plant. And the soil feeds the plant. That is the difference that most modern advice never quite gets to. We talk about feeding the plant, but the plant is fed by the soil, and the soil is fed by what goes into it, and what goes into it is what we decide to throw away. That whole chain matters. The third layer is even more interesting, and this is the one the nurseryman spent the most time on. Orange peels feed the soil biology. They feed the fungi. They feed the bacteria. They feed the worms. They give the underground workers something to work on, and every time the underground workers have something to do, they do all their other jobs better. They hold water longer. They open up the soil structure. They make nutrients more available to the roots. A rose bush growing in biologically active soil is not the same plant as a rose bush growing in soil that is technically present, but not really alive. Most of us look at the plant and forget to look at the soil underneath it. We see the leaves, we see the bloom, we see the mulch on top. We do not see the actual home the roots live in. The soil is the whole conversation. The plant is just the part you can see above the ground. So when you bury citrus peels around a rose bush, you are doing 3 things at once. You are slowly feeding nutrients to the soil. You are feeding the biology that turns soil into living soil. and you are increasing the moisture holding capacity of the ground the roots live in. None of those three jobs gets done by tossing a peel in the trash. All three of them get done by tossing a peel into a shallow trench around the bush and walking away. Now, here is the part where most people who try this in their first year go wrong, because I went wrong on every single one of these the first time and I want to save you the trouble. Do not leave the peels on the surface. A peel drying out on top of the soil curls up stiff, bleaches in the sun, and either blows away across the yard or sits there inert for months. The microbes that break citrus skin down need moisture, they need darkness, and they need contact with the living layer of the soil, so the peel has to go under. 3 or 4 inches deep is plenty. Deeper than that is wasted effort. Do not pile them up against the main stem of the bush. Roses do not enjoy fresh material pressed against their bark. It traps moisture against the crown, ferments unevenly, and over time can invite the kind of slow rot you do not want to deal with in August, when the humidity is already working against you. Drop the peels in a ring around the bush, about 6 to 10 inches out from the center, just inside the drip line where the feeder roots are actually doing their work. Think of a donut, not a tower. Do not bury them in one giant mound all at once. I tried this under a different shrub one summer just to see what would happen, and the smell that came up out of that trench for 2 weeks taught me the lesson the hard way. The soil can only process so much at a time. Smaller amounts, added regularly, are far better than one big push. A handful every couple of weeks through the growing season is the rhythm that quietly works best, the way a small, steady paycheck works better than a single lottery ticket. Use peels from your own kitchen. Avoid peels from candied fruit, from heavily processed citrus, or from anything with a sugar coating or a preservative wash. Plain peelings from fresh oranges, lemons, limes, grapefruits, mandarins, tangerines, even kumquats if you are the kind of household that ends up with kumquats, are all fine. The thicker the peel, the longer it lasts. Grapefruit peels push nutrients for months. Mandarin peels vanish in weeks. Both are welcome underground. If you want them to break down faster, tear them or chop them before you bury them. Whole peels work fine, but they look kind of strange in the trench, and they take longer to disappear. Torn peels have more surface area for microbes to enter, and they integrate into the soil sooner. There is no wrong answer here. Pick whichever fits your patience. The point is to get them under the soil, not to slice them into perfect little squares. Water them in. After you bury the peels, give the area a slow, deep soak. The moisture wakes the soil up around the peel, pulls the soil back into tight contact with the skin, and starts the whole breakdown process moving in the right direction. A dry trench is a trench that sits. A damp trench is a trench that starts working within the week, and you can almost feel it when you step on the spot a few days later. Save the peels in a paper bag in the meantime, not in a sealed plastic bag in the fridge. A paper bag lets the peels breathe and dry just a little at the edges, which means they start breaking down in the right direction the moment they hit the soil. A plastic bag holds moisture against the skins and tilts the breakdown towards something sour instead of rich. Old detail, small detail. The kind of detail my grandmother knew without anyone writing it down for her. And that last detail, that small thing about the paper bag, is what I keep coming back to. Because what I learned last year, what I keep learning in this yard, is not really about orange peels. The peels are just the door. The thing behind the door is older than any of us. It is the idea that the kitchen and the garden are not two separate places. They are one place. They are the same loop, viewed from different rooms. And when you break that loop, even in a small way, the garden and the kitchen both get weaker. When you reconnect it, even in a small way, both of them start to come back to life. That is the lesson my grandmother taught me without ever saying it. That is the lesson the nurseryman confirmed, without sounding like he was teaching me anything. That is the lesson the rosebush showed me in the 4th month when it stopped being fine and started being itself again. And if you take nothing else away from this, take that. The scraps are not waste. They are the next meal of the soil, and the soil is the next meal of the plant. And the plant is the next thing that comes into the kitchen. That is the whole circuit. That is the whole rhythm. We forgot it for a while, but the soil never forgot. It was just waiting for us to remember. I should also mention what to avoid, because there are a few common mistakes worth flagging. Do not bury peels from fruit that has been heavily waxed for long-distance shipping. That wax does not belong in your soil bed. Do not bury peels next to a rose bush that has just been freshly planted, because the new root system is too tender to handle rich fermentation right next to it. Wait until the bush has been in the ground at least a full season before you start burying peels around it. Do not bury citrus if your soil is already very acidic and your roses are showing yellowing between the veins of the leaves. Because citrus is itself slightly acidic, and you can push the balance the wrong way if you overdo it. Check the soil every few months if you are uncertain. A simple test kit is enough. And above all, do not treat this as a substitute for the basic work. Watering, pruning, mulching, the things any rose needs to survive, still matter. The peels are not magic. They are one small input among many. They just happen to be one you have been throwing away. If you want to try this in your own yard, here is the short version of everything I just walked you through. Collect your citrus peels in a paper bag in the kitchen. Every couple of weeks, dig a shallow ring trench around the base of your rose bush, about 6 to 10 inches out from the center, 3 or 4 inches deep. Drop in a small handful of peels. Cover them up. Water the spot deeply. Walk away. Do not expect anything dramatic in week 1. Do not even expect much in week 3. Expect something quietly different in month 3. Expect something you can show to a neighbor in month 4. That is the rhythm. That is the whole job. I will be honest with you the same way I have been honest all the way through. Citrus peels are not magic. They are not going to save a sick bush. They are not going to undo years of compacted soil, or years of wrong pruning, or years of a rose variety that never belonged in your climate to begin with. They are also not a substitute for watering, for mulching, or for the basic care any plant needs. But for a rose bush that is mostly fine, and wants to be more than fine, this is one of the oldest, cheapest, slowest ways in the world to tip the balance. And tipping the balance is most of what gardening ever was. We do not solve gardens in a weekend. We nudge them, week after week, with small, quiet choices that almost no one notices at the time. The bush notices, the soil notices, and by month 4, your neighbor notices too. If you have ever composted citrus peels, buried them under a shrub because someone older told you to, or watched a kitchen scrap do something in the garden that you did not fully understand at the time, I would love to hear what you saw. Drop your experience in the comments, especially the part that surprised you, especially the part that took longer than you expected, especially the part that made a neighbor walk over and ask what you had changed. Those comments are the part of this channel that I read first, because they are the part that teaches me things I did not think of when I wrote this, and they are the part that connects people who are doing the same quiet work in their own yards, under their own conditions. And if you have an older relative in your life who did something like this without ever explaining why, ask them about it soon, while the memory is still in the room. Their answer is probably the piece of soil wisdom your own yard has been missing all along. The next time you are standing at the counter in the early morning, peeling an orange for breakfast, take 1 extra second before you walk those peels to the trash. There is a bush somewhere on the other side of the house that has no idea what is about to happen underneath it, and it is going to spend the next 4 months quietly getting better because of one small choice you just made at the cutting board.